In 1977, police in Chicago discovered a crawl space under a man's house containing the remains of 29 young men. But what made investigators physically ill wasn't just the bodies, it was the meticulous records the owner kept, detailing each victim's last moments with the clinical precision of a scientist documenting an experiment. He had sketched their faces, noted the exact time of death, and rated their responses to torture on a numerical scale. When they arrested him, he was calmly eating dinner, and his only comment was to ask if they'd found all of them yet, because he'd lost count. This is just one of the 2 cases you're about to hear, stories so disturbing that history has actively tried to forget them, to bury them so deep that maybe, just maybe, we could pretend they never happened. Before we dive into these impossible cases, leave us a comment with what time it is, where you are, and whether you can sleep after these stories. And if you're brave enough not to miss any of our weekly cases, subscribe to the channel now. Turn off the lights, turn up the volume, and let's unravel these mysteries that history wanted to erase. Chicago, Illinois, 1972. John Wayne Gacy was exactly the kind of neighbor everyone wanted on their block. He was a successful building contractor, active in local Democratic Party politics, performed as Pogo the Clown at children's hospitals and charity events, threw elaborate street parties for the entire neighborhood where he'd personally cook for hundreds of people. He was married, a pillar of the community, the kind of man who volunteered for everything and always had a smile ready. He even had his photo taken with First Lady Rosalynn Carter at a Democratic fundraiser. To everyone who knew him, John Wayne Gacy was living proof that the American dream was real and accessible. But underneath that carefully constructed facade was something so dark, so methodically evil, that even seasoned homicide detectives would need therapy after working his case. Gacy's crimes began shortly after he moved into his ranch house in the Norwood Park neighborhood of Chicago. He had recently divorced and was living alone, which gave him the privacy he needed for what he was planning. Gacy developed a system, a carefully refined process that he would perfect over 6 years. He would hire teenage boys and young men to work for his construction company, offering good wages and the promise of steady employment. He'd invite them to his house to discuss work details, offer them drinks, get them comfortable. Then he would show them what he called his handcuff trick, a magic act where he'd put handcuffs on them and then make them disappear. Except the handcuffs never came off. What made Gacy particularly terrifying wasn't just what he did to his victims. It was the psychological game he played with them first. He would tell them that the trick was that the key was hidden somewhere in the room, and if they could figure out the riddle he gave them, they could free themselves. Of course, there was no riddle, no hidden key, no escape. But for hours, sometimes days, his victims would desperately try to solve a puzzle that didn't exist while Gacy watched, taking notes on their psychological deterioration. He kept a journal, never found by police, but described in his confessions, where he documented each victim's breaking point, the moment they stopped trying to solve the riddle and accepted what was about to happen. The crawl space under Gacy's house became a tomb. He would bury victims there, sometimes within hours of killing them, sometimes keeping them above ground for days while he decided on the placement. He had a system for this too, arranging bodies in a specific pattern, marking locations with spray paint on the floorboards above, so he'd know where each one was. When investigators finally excavated the crawl space, they found the bodies laid out with a precision that suggested careful planning and organization. Gacy had created a graveyard under his home, and he knew the exact location of every single occupant. But the crawl space could only hold so many bodies. By 1978, Gacy had run out of room, so he adapted, began dumping bodies in the Des Plaines River, weighting them down, scattering them so they'd be harder to connect. The last 5 victims were all found in the river, But what finally caught Gacy wasn't the bodies, it was his own arrogance. When 15-year-old Robert Piest disappeared in December 1978 after telling his mother he was going to talk to a contractor about a job, investigators looked into that contractor. It was Gacy. They obtained a search warrant, not expecting to find a body, just hoping for some evidence that might lead to the boy. What they found instead was a house of horrors. The smell hit them immediately, the sickly, sweet odor of decomposition that Gacy had explained away to neighbors as a moisture problem in his crawl space. When they pulled up the floorboards and shined their lights down, they saw what looked like a mass grave. The excavation took weeks. 29 bodies were recovered from the crawl space, some so decayed they could only be identified by dental records, others in various stages of decomposition. The house had to be demolished afterward. The contamination was so severe. The lot sat empty for years because no one would build on it. During his interrogation, Gacy showed no remorse, no emotion beyond mild irritation at being caught. He spoke about his victims the way someone might discuss clearing out an old storage unit, matter of fact, slightly inconvenienced by the effort it had taken. He couldn't remember all their names, referred to many of them as just numbers or physical descriptions. When detectives showed him photos of the recovered bodies and asked him to identify them, he would make comments about their physical condition as if he were a coroner, not their killer. He complained that some of the bodies in the river had probably floated away, that his count might be off, that it was hard to keep track when you've been doing it for 6 years. The trial became a media sensation, but it was the psychiatric evaluation that revealed just how disturbing Gacy really was. Multiple psychiatrists examined him, and they all agreed on one thing: Gacy knew exactly what he was doing, had complete control of his faculties, and simply didn't care that it was wrong. He didn't have delusions, wasn't responding to voices, wasn't in a dissociative state. He was fully present and aware during every single murder, and he chose to do it anyway because it gave him pleasure. The defense tried to argue insanity, but the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Gacy had planned too carefully, hidden his crimes too successfully, maintained his public persona too perfectly. You don't perform at children's parties in the afternoon and systematically torture teenagers in your basement at night unless you're fully aware of what you're doing and why you need to hide it. Gacy was convicted of 33 murders and sentenced to death. He spent 14 years on death row, during which time he gave multiple interviews where he showed the same chilling calmness. He took up painting, creating disturbing images of clowns and skulls that he sold to collectors. He never admitted full responsibility, claimed that some of the victims had died accidentally during consensual sex, that he was being scapegoated for unsolved murders in the area. Even facing execution, Gacy couldn't stop playing games, couldn't stop trying to control the narrative. He was executed by lethal injection in 1994. His last words were reportedly, "Kiss my ass," directed at the witnesses. Even in death, Gacy remained defiant, unrepentant, proud of what he'd done. The aftermath of Gacy's crimes sent shockwaves through American society. Parents realized that the friendly neighbor, the successful businessman, the party clown could be a monster. The case led to major reforms in how missing persons cases were handled, particularly involving young men and boys who had often been dismissed as runaways. It exposed the vulnerability of marginalized youth. Many of Gacy's victims were runaways or young men from troubled homes, people who wouldn't immediately be missed. Gacy knew this, targeted them specifically because of it. His case became a blueprint for understanding how serial killers could hide in plain sight, how they could compartmentalize their lives so completely that even people who saw them daily never suspected. Feeling that chill down your spine? If you're enjoying these mysteries, leave a like on the video to help us continue investigating cases like these. And in the comments, tell us if you've heard of these cases before or know any different theories. Subscribe so you don't miss the next mysteries. Now get ready, because what comes next will keep you up at night. If Gacy showed us how evil could hide behind a friendly smile, our next case shows us something even more disturbing. How it could hide behind respectability, intelligence, and even heroism. Because our second person wasn't just accepted by society, he was celebrated by it, right up until the moment his true nature was finally exposed. Josef Fritzl was born in Austria in 1935 and grew up in the shadow of World War II. His childhood was marked by an abusive mother and an absent father, creating what psychologists later described as a perfect storm for the development of a control obsession. But unlike many people with difficult childhoods, Fritzl didn't show obvious signs of disturbance. He was intelligent, hard-working, became a successful electrical engineer. He married, had children, bought a nice house in Amstetten, Austria. To his neighbors and colleagues, he was a respectable family man, perhaps a bit stern, but successful and responsible. No one suspected that beneath his house he was constructing what would become a prison that would hold his own daughter captive for 24 years. In 1984, Fritzl's daughter Elisabeth was 18 years old and planning to leave home, to escape her controlling father and start her own life. Fritzl couldn't allow that. On August 28, 1984, he lured Elisabeth into the basement of their house under the pretense of needing help with a door. Once she was inside, he drugged her with ether, handcuffed her, and locked her in a concealed cellar that he had spent years secretly constructing. The cellar was hidden behind a heavy concrete door, disguised to look like part of the basement wall, secured with an electronic lock that only Fritzl knew the code to. Elisabeth woke up in a windowless room, approximately 20 square meters, that would be her entire world for the next 2 decades. What makes Fritzl's case particularly disturbing is the level of planning and premeditation. He had been preparing this prison for years before he finally used it. He had soundproofed the walls, installed ventilation, wired electricity, created a self-contained living space. He had thought through every detail: how to bring food without being seen, how to dispose of waste, how to explain Elisabeth's absence. He told his wife and other children that Elisabeth had run away to join a cult, that she had abandoned the family. He even produced letters supposedly from Elisabeth saying she was fine and didn't want to be found. The letters were real. Fritzl had forced Elisabeth to write them under threat of never seeing daylight again. For 24 years, Fritzl maintained a double life with a precision that still baffles psychologists. He would go to work every day, attend family gatherings, celebrate holidays, maintain his reputation in the community. Then he would descend into his basement and visit the daughter he kept imprisoned, bringing food, supplies, and inflicting abuse that resulted in Elisabeth giving birth to 7 children in that cellar. 3 of those children never saw the world above. They grew up entirely in that underground prison, never feeling sunlight, never seeing the sky, never knowing that anything existed beyond those concrete walls. The 3 children who did make it above ground did so through an elaborate deception. Fritzl would take the infants upstairs and claim that Elisabeth had left them on the doorstep, that she was still in the cult but couldn't care for them. His wife, Rosemarie, who Fritzl kept completely in the dark about the cellar, agreed to raise them as her own grandchildren. So Fritzl would sit at family dinners with some of his grandchildren, while their mother and siblings remained locked in the cellar directly beneath them. The psychological compartmentalization required to maintain this is almost incomprehensible. Life in the cellar was marked by deprivation and control. Elisabeth and her children had limited food, no fresh air, no natural light, no contact with anyone except Fritzl. The children who grew up there had developmental delays. Their teeth were rotting from poor nutrition. Their skin was pale from never seeing sun. Their immune systems were weak from the sterile environment. Elizabeth tried to maintain some normalcy, teaching her children what she could remember from school, creating routines, celebrating birthdays with homemade gifts crafted from whatever materials Fritzl brought down. But she couldn't protect them from the fundamental horror of their situation, that they were prisoners of their own grandfather, hidden beneath a normal house in a normal town where people walked past every day with no idea they existed. The case finally broke open in 2008 when one of the cellar children, 19-year-old Kerstin, became seriously ill with kidney failure. Fritzl was forced to bring her to the hospital, claiming she had suddenly appeared on the doorstep. But doctors were suspicious. Her condition suggested long-term neglect and environmental deprivation. They made public appeals for the mother to come forward, which Fritzl recorded and showed to Elizabeth. Desperate to save her daughter, Elizabeth finally convinced Fritzl to allow her to go to the hospital. When she emerged after 24 years underground, she looked decades older than her actual age of 42, pale, frail, with teeth falling out and a haunted expression that nurses described as absolutely heartbreaking. Once Elizabeth was safely in the hospital, she told her story. Police immediately went to the Fritzl house and discovered the hidden cellar. What they found was a crime scene that stretched back nearly a quarter century, a cramped series of rooms that had been home to a family for an entire generation. The conditions were horrific, damp, moldy, with makeshift furniture and deteriorating infrastructure. The children who had lived there their entire lives had to be carefully acclimated to the outside world. Sunlight physically hurt their eyes. Fresh air made them dizzy. Open spaces terrified them. Fritzl was arrested and initially denied everything, then admitted to some details while minimizing others, then finally confessed to the full scope of his crimes. During his trial in 2009, psychiatrists testified that Fritzl had a severe personality disorder characterized by an extreme need for control, lack of empathy, and ability to compartmentalize that allowed him to maintain his double life without apparent psychological distress. He showed no genuine remorse, instead expressed irritation that his carefully constructed system had been disrupted. When asked how he could do this to his own daughter, he claimed he had been protecting her from the world, that the cellar was for her own good. The delusion was so complete that he seemed to genuinely believe his own justifications. Fritzl was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole. He's currently held in a psychiatric facility for criminally insane prisoners, where he will remain until his death. Elizabeth and her children were given new identities and relocated to an undisclosed location where they're undergoing intensive therapy. The house in Amstetten was demolished. The town wanted no memorial to the horror that had occurred there. But the psychological scars remain, not just for the victims, but for an entire community that had to confront the fact that such evil had existed in their midst, hidden in plain sight for nearly a quarter century. What makes Gacy and Fritzl particularly disturbing isn't just the nature of their crimes, it's how successfully they hid in society. Gacy was beloved in his community, trusted with children, photographed with politicians. Fritzl was a respectable businessman, a family man, someone you'd never suspect. Both men show us that evil doesn't announce itself, doesn't wear a sign, doesn't look like the monsters in movies. It looks like your neighbor, your co-worker, the person sitting next to you on the bus. Both cases forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about how much we don't know about the people around us, how easily facades can be maintained, how many victims can accumulate before anyone notices. These cases also reveal disturbing patterns about how society responds to missing persons, particularly vulnerable populations. Many of Gacy's victims were dismissed as runaways. Elizabeth's disappearance was accepted with minimal investigation because her father had a plausible story. The systems designed to protect people failed repeatedly, and the question remains, how many other cases are out there right now, hidden behind closed doors, waiting to be discovered? These cases continue to haunt us. If you're as disturbed as we are, leave a like, comment your theories, and share with anyone brave enough to listen. Explore our channel to learn about more unsolved mysteries and the darkest secrets in history. If you haven't subscribed yet, join the brave souls who follow our cases. Hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications so you don't miss any new cases. Leave your like if this video left you thinking, and share it with that friend who says they're not afraid of anything. Comments are open. Tell us what other disturbing cases you want us to investigate. Until next time, and sleep well if you can.